Welcome back, everyone. This is Chaplain David Woodward, joined with Captain Maddie Wacker, and we're diving into spiritual fitness and what that looks like. And today we're going to be looking more into how to prioritize spiritual fitness and what that's looked like in Maddie's life and my life.
So going into the prioritization of spiritual fitness, I think that I would feel confident saying that a lot of individuals out there are ready to take on a journey of prioritizing their spiritual fitness or finding ways to incorporate it, and they may just not know where to start. And so in a very busy society, right, we can get bogged down with feeling like we don't have time. And so how do we create time and space in order to make spiritual fitness a priority?
Great. So I love how you talk about it as a journey. I just have in my mind, right, Bilbo Baggins running away from the Shire saying, I'm going on an adventure, because that's
our spiritual adventure.
Yeah, our spiritual adventure, because life is, or at least it can be, a great adventure. And if your life is not a great adventure yet, that's on you.
Yeah.
And
you still have time.
Yeah, one of my favorite stories that I heard from a psychologist was he was talking about a woman who went in to get help and her life was a mess. And she just said, man, I hope this is all my fault. And he goes, excuse me? Well, why do you want all this stuff to be your fault? And she said, because if it's my fault, then I can do something about it. But if it's someone else's fault, I can't, right?
What a great perspective.
And so the more that we just take that extreme ownership of whether or not we're doing well, it's on us. And even better, of when we are doing well, the more of that success we can give away to others as we're confident in what we're doing, the better. And so how do we prioritize it, and how do we make time? When I was doing a lot of spiritual coaching, one of the most frustrating things I heard was, I didn't have time this week. Well, I didn't make you do this. You committed to do this, and you agreed to these goals, and then you didn't make time. We all have time. We all have the same amount of time, right? The correct answer is, I didn't prioritize this to make time for it. And so what does spiritual fitness look like? And even just this morning, I was rereading a speech that a guy gave where he was talking about the British cycling team that for pretty much all of the 20th century was dreadful, just like the laughing stock, to the point where a lot of the top tier cycling businesses wouldn't even sell the British team cycling equipment because they didn't want their name attached to the British cycling team.
That is pretty bad.
Yeah. And and then in 2003, Sir Dave Brailsford was hired. And what he did, unlike other previous coaches who attempted all these dramatic overhauls and everything, was he implemented what he called the aggregation of marginal gains. And so this focused on improving small things 1%. And if we can make a lot of things 1% better, for example, if we got better by 1% at something every day for a year, by the end of the year, we'd be 37 times better. And so I love this law of the aggregation of marginal gains. And this took the British cycling team from the laughingstock of the cycling world to the top competitor. Whether it's the Olympic Games or whatever, in the, I think it was the recent Olympics that the Japanese hosted, that the British cycling team got more gold medals than anybody else. And they started breaking more records, and they'd never won the Tour de France before that. And I think in the first 20 years of the 21st century, they won it like 6 times, right? So this aggregate growth of these small marginal gains, and that's really what we're looking at. We're not trying to look for things that change overnight and are really big. We're looking at small things that we can do consistently, right? Again, going back to working out. If I'm not working out and I go and I just do my 3-rep max on bench, squat, deadlift, and pull-ups or whatever, and then I don't come back, all I'm going to get out of that is being really sore for the next week. And I don't know about you, but definitely for me, I'm a 2-day after type person where I'm really regretting those decisions. But if we can be consistent in small things over time, then we change, right? And I have control over that. And I have a control problem. I like being in control.
Don't we all?
So, as we focus on, again, what we talked about in our last episode of vertical spirituality and horizontal spirituality, what are some small things that we can do to, just like Sir Dave Brailsford, sorry if I'm butchering your name, Sir Dave, but the aggregation of marginal gains, and what are some simple things we can do? And we talked a little bit about prayer and the vertical spirituality of whatever your higher power is starting to communicate with your higher power, and to wait after you communicate so you're also ready to receive. One of the ways that you can receive is by studying spiritual text. There are so many apps out there that will send you a daily verse or paragraph of a religious text that you're interested in studying, whether it is the Quran or the Bible or teachings of Buddha or the Book of Mormon or whatever. Maybe you want to do a couple. Pretty much all those religions have some good things, and if you don't think they have anything good, then you're wrong. Find some of these sacred texts, and if nothing else, you can read a daily verse. That takes all of 20 seconds a lot of the time. And then you can ponder that throughout the day. So some type, ideally, I would say 15 minutes a day is much more ideal as a minimum of sacred text study, because we're looking for, and that's about 1% of your waking day is 10 to 15 minutes. I forgot the math off the top of my head, but if I can schedule 10 minutes of my day and that's consistent, well, not only do I have that, the aggregate of marginal gains, but that just alleviates setting up some structure in my life, because now I don't have to worry about that 1% of my day. It's already taken care of. And if you're like, oh, it's only 1%. Yeah, but if it's 1% of your life every day for the next 60 years, that's not an insignificant amount of time.
If it worked for the British cycling team, it can work for us.
That's right. And I'm no cyclist. So, and not only can it work for us, it does and it will. And I've not only seen it in my life, but everyone's life who has implemented this. So another one is fasting, which is another fun one to dive over into the physical realm as well, and some of the benefits of fasting on a periodic but also kind of routine basis of whether you're going without food. My wife's a dietitian, and all the awesome things that your body does with going without food for up to 24 or 36 hours. Not all the time, right? And we definitely like to eat, but maybe on a monthly basis or something, of how that rejuvenates our body, but it also rejuvenates our spirit, as we are literally, from my perspective, starving our body. It allows us to focus and value spiritual things, and then that also bleeds into the next one of gratitude, of having gratitude in everything. We talked about that in the last episode. Definitely revisit that if you haven't in a while or haven't yet at all. And then another one is to attend and participate in some type of worship service of your higher power. In the Christian world, we call this church. In the Muslim world, it's the mosque. In the Jewish world, it's synagogue. And between those three, I've covered the majority of the world's population. But whatever it is, whether you are a Sikh or practice Jainism or whatever it is, find some people that have the same fundamental principles that you're trying to base your life off of, who are trying to reach a higher power that's similar to you, and get together and talk about what you've learned and how you've implemented. And there's so much power in this. I feel like in American culture today, we poo-poo so much going to church, and people say that they believe in some type of higher power, but then they don't ever stick their money where their mouth is. Or as a soldier that I was talking to recently, he said that they were Pinterest believers, where they would go on certain days and so they could snap a picture and prove that they were there for Pinterest. But we got to do better than that, right? That's the equivalent of going to the gym twice a year and all you're going to be is sore.
And all you'll capture is the mirror picture.
That's right. Maybe one of those mirrors that makes me look really good.
There you go.
A couple other things that we can do is discover the joy of daily reflection and improvement. what did I do today and how can I do better, right? Just that question, and it only takes a minute or two. We can do that while we're sitting in traffic or riding or walking our bike home or whatever. How did this go and how can I do even better in the future is an invaluable question to ponder over. And then seek out the higher power and learn how the higher power works. How does this work? Everything has a pattern. There's a motion that's been set in place. How does this work? Lots of times people try and pit science against religion, and I would say for true science and true religion, they're 100% congruent. And so maybe when I get false science or false religion, then they're going to have to budge. But when we put these together, they work the same. So as we try and figure out how that works, seek spiritual paths and build habits to be consistent. Again, this consistency is the best thing we could do. I used to coach an archery team when I taught junior high, and that was our motto, was consistency. Whatever you're doing, do it the exact same, and then we can make one variable adjustment at a time. And those junior high and elementary school archers worked their tails off and won a state trophy, and many of them went to the national competition based on consistency. And that's the same thing in the spiritual realm. What stands out to you, Maddie, about some of those momentum builders?
Well, I think quite a few of them stand out, and I'm going to recap them for our listeners and to make sure that I captured them correctly. So one of the first things, and again, it goes back from some of our conversation in that first episode. Again, if you haven't listened, great listen. Take the time when you have it. Because as Chaplain Woodward said, we all have the same amount of time. So,
Just real quick, on that time, if possible, adjust the speed settings to as fast as you can digest what's going on. I listen to everything on double speed, if not, depending on the speaker, 2.5 speed. And,
there you go. Another hack.
Yeah, you don't even have to pay extra for that. I'm here for at least the rest of the episode.
So the first thing that you brought up, and it is one of my favorites, is that when we are seeking out ways to prioritize our spiritual fitness, we have to take ownership. So number one is taking ownership, right? It's on us if we want to improve spiritual fitness, and I'll extend that to any other domain in life, whether you want to call it H2F or whether you just want to call it human health, human improvement. It's on us. Take ownership of what you want to improve and take action on that. The second thing, learning from Sir David from the British cycling team, is the aggregation of marginal gains. So instead of always listening to the flashier, larger, dramatic changes, focus more on the small, consistent changes that you can do on a daily basis, aiming for roughly 10 to 15 minutes a day, which will equate to 1% improvement. The third thing, this will be 2.5. My understanding is that it is cool again to join the British cycling team. So yes. they are back
but I'm
in
not
good
British.
Standings. And you said you didn't cycle, so.
Well, but I could change that if I chose to.
You could, 1% every day. So we'll call that 2.5. Number 3 was, again, bringing back to 3 of the things that we can do to cultivate spiritual fitness, which we did discuss this a bit more in depth in that first episode, and that's communicating, being open to listen and receive, and expressing gratitude. The next thing was finding a way to actually gather with those around us and worship as a group. Again, this, from your communication, this can look a lot of different ways. And so you're not boxed in there, but finding some way to interact with a community, your community, as a service to others, and to participate in that group worshiping.
So yeah, as you were saying that just reminded me of, not many people I know want to watch the Super Bowl by themselves, right? That's why Super Bowl parties are a part of American culture, because we want to get together with people that enjoy the same things, value the same things, and celebrate this thing together. And that's the exact same in the spiritual realm, right? Find some people who have similar goals, who are trying to find the higher power, and get together. And just like watching the Super Bowl with a group of people versus sitting there in solitary confinement, it makes the search and the spiritual fitness so much better.
Yeah. Strengthen numbers. It gets conversation going. You get new perspectives. Absolutely. The next thing to build momentum that you reminded us, and I like this one a lot, is the daily reflection and improvement. So that one stood out a lot to me. that's something, again, like you said, at the end of the day, you don't even have to write anything down. If you can do this mentally, just think about where in your day you could have done better to cultivate that spiritual fitness, that service to others, that gratitude, your communication, your pauses to listen. I think that also ties back into those assessments that we linked in the first episode, which are available. And, maybe those aren't daily things, but I do think that ties into the bigger picture of general reflection and improvement. And I like to think of those assessments as just data collection, and data isn't good, data isn't bad. So even if you do that assessment and you notice you made no improvements or you made negative traction, that's just data. It's not necessarily a reflection of your moral character as long as you're willing to continue to try to improve. So tying those periodic assessments in with that was kind of my addition on the daily reflection and improvement. And then the final two, number 6, to continue building momentum and prioritizing spiritual fitness, was to continue to seek out a higher power and understanding of that higher power, which, based on how you've presented that, sounds to be a very ongoing journey and perhaps a lifelong journey. And then the final one, tying it all back into finding habits to build consistency. And I wholeheartedly agree that consistency wins out almost every time. Consistency, can't beat it.
I love it. And that's true. It doesn't, right? We all know this, right? Aesop's fable of the tortoise and the hare. Whether you talk to, health experts like Captain Whacker here, or you're listening to financial people who are very wealthy, don't listen to financial people that aren't wealthy. Okay, that's right. I don't go to the person that we referenced in the first episode covered in Cheeto dust to get health recommendations, right? Find someone is successful and do what they do, right? I don't go to someone who is super overweight and ask them, vice versa. If I'm overweight, I don't go to the person with a 6-pack and then argue with them about how to get a 6-pack. So yeah, it's be consistent, find someone who's doing well, and then do what they do, because consistency always wins out.
And that just to bring it back a little bit, that ties back into finding other individuals that appear to maybe be on a similar path. And that I guess that can be a little bit tricky, because if you're on the wrong path, you also don't want to go down a bit of a rabbit hole there. But try to find other individuals who have, shared values, shared morals, shared beliefs, and kind of pull from their momentum and gain guidance from them, right? It can help to guide that. And that's not to say that I think in doing that, you will find variation within that group. And there's a lot of value in that as well. Find people who will challenge your beliefs so that you can continue to stay balanced and continue to do that reflection on if what you're doing is the path that you want to be on and is a quote unquote right path.
Yeah, so my wife's a foodie. She loves trying all the stuff, and growing up, I always just kind of wolfed my food down and got back to work, whatever I was doing. And so I've been, reminded and invited to slow down a time or two in my life. And it's kind of the same thing of taking the time to see if what you're eating's even good, right? Are these decisions, are they leading down the path that I want long term? Because that's always the question. Spiritual fitness is impossible to reach without a long-term view. You can't have it. Otherwise, you will just be focused on the hedonistic right now, what gives me immediate pleasure, and you will never get spiritual fitness. Spiritual fitness is only the long game. And so if we'll take time, right, to chew our food, as maybe we've been reminded before of, 20 times is the recommendation.
Roughly 20.
Try
that today.
Yeah.
If you're listening, try to chew your food 20 times.
Yeah, it turns into mush. Oh, that is hard because definitely a texture person here. But I'm like, you know what? This is good
Get more
for me,
flavors,
so I'll do
though.
it. Yeah, and
Starts digestion.
so as we do that with the starting the digestion and taking time to really enjoy our food, hopefully you're enjoying it. If you're not enjoying it, you need to get better food. But as we take the time to do that spiritually and see where's this going instead of just wolfing things down, I love the critical aspect. And if you're in a spiritual group that doesn't allow you to ask questions or discourages questions, just find a different group. It is not worth it. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to as a Christian. I'm totally fine throwing this aspect of some Christianity or people who claim to be Christian under the bus, but I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who said, yeah, when I was a kid, I started asking questions in church or Sunday school, and I, was told to stop. And for me, that blows my mind. Like, you were told to stop. You have someone who has buy-in, right? If you're just trying to be a jerk or a troll, that's a whole nother aspect. But someone who's asking genuine questions, ask away. And if you're not in some type of spiritual path that is open to questions, we should be dying for people to ask questions, because that means they're actually thinking about what they are doing and they want to be better.
And to tie it back into that relationship between science and religion, if in either of those areas you stop asking questions, you stop learning.
Yes, exactly. And I would say intelligence is the glory of God. Intelligence is the glory of the Creator. And intelligence is the end-all, be-all, coupled with honor, which we can dive into that a little later if you want. I'm going to jump into the horizontal aspect of spiritual momentum and what can build our horizontal spiritual momentum. So again, vertical spirituality is a connection between us and a higher power. Horizontal spirituality is a connection between us and those around us, other people. So the number one thing we can do is strive to end conflict in our personal lives. If we want harmony, we can dive into forgiveness a little bit. I recently heard from a gentleman that I look up to named Victor Marx, and he defined forgiveness as giving up the right to hurt someone who has hurt you first. And I really like that. You're giving up the right to hurt someone who has hurt you first. And so it doesn't mean that you're agreeing with what happened. It doesn't mean that you're accepting or you're setting yourself up again to get hurt, but you're giving up the right to hurt someone back. It doesn't mean you are denying justice. I can forgive someone and still let the full weight of justice fall on them from the law or whatever, but I'm giving up that personal right to do that back, right? We'll talk about communication in one of our later episodes as we dive more into ending personal conflict in your life, but that's a lot of what I do as the chaplain, is help people work through that, give you skills, tools in your toolbox to overcome and end personal conflict in your life. Another one is to serve those around you. You will lift yourself through lifting others, and one of the best ways to get out of your pity party, which doesn't help or solve anything, is just to do something nice for those around you. And you will love what you serve. End of story. This is why a lot of our mothers can love us, even though we're a pain in the behind, especially growing up, is because they've served and sacrificed for us. Each of our moms, if nothing else, grew us inside her, which was a service and sacrifice that we all owe to her. And so that's why she loves us, is because we love what or who we serve. End of story. Another one that we've talked about quite a bit is gratitude for everything and everyone around you. Tied into this is community service. A great website or app to get into community service is called Just Serve, or justserve.org. This is where anyone in the community can put where they need some community service, whether it's schools or individuals or businesses or whatever, and you can go and find some different community service in there that you want to participate in. Another one is to go out of your way to be kind to somebody today. I remember talking with a gentleman several years ago who didn't get out of his house much, and he was just overjoyed that when he went to the grocery store, he was able to pull carts out and give them to someone else. Whether it's something little or something big, no good is wasted. No good we do is ever wasted. Sometimes it really feels like it does, and it's an uphill battle, but it's not, okay? It's not. So go out of your way to do something kind for someone today. Learn and practice active listening. There's entire courses you can take on active listening, so look that up. One of my favorites is just tell me more. That phrase has helped me build relationships, listen, engage, understand, grow, probably more than anything else in this life. When someone tells me something and I invite them to tell me more. Another one I'm going to use from Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, but is to think win-win in your reactions with others. How can I interact with others so that we both come away from this with our best possible outcomes? And especially with those who are close to us, with our family members, close coworkers, but really anyone, how can we interact in such a way that we both can get exactly what we want? And we can dive more into this and use that principle through whatever else, but I'll give you an example from my life real quick, right? So I've always dreamt of doing hunting, and I've always wanted to go hunting, whether it's small game or big game or ducks, or I don't care, whatever it is. And just growing up, no one else in my immediate family hunted, so that didn't really happen. And then became an adult, got married, but I'm still, working full-time, going to school full-time, kids come along, there's no time, at least from my perspective in my life. So finally I've gotten to the point where I'm like, okay, there's time now to go hunting, I'm done with school, I will never step in a schoolhouse again as a student. I love learning, but I don't like going to school and learning that way. Actually, I really like podcasts. I listen to a lot of podcasts. So, welcome, listener. Great job. So, I went to my wonderful wife, and I'm like, hey, I want to go hunting. And I thought I could go early in the morning before work because I can hunt near work where we're at right now. And then that way, I'm still home in the evenings. I can help with the kids, right? I'm not going out for a 5-day long hunting trip. I'm still here. I can still participate. So I thought I'd figured out this great win-win. Well, here comes the active listening as Lisa's like, well, actually, it would be way more helpful for me if you were here in the morning to help kind of get things going. Lisa and I try and go on like a 2-mile walk 3 or 4 days a week. So we're there for our morning walks. And actually, I would prefer if you went after work and hunted till sundown instead of from sunup to work. I'm like, oh, okay, great. So that was a win for her, that I'd be there in the mornings, and that was more meaningful for her. I get to go hunting. That's a win, right? Instead of just, well, I want to do this, so I'm going to go do this week-long guys trip, and you can suck it up and watch the kids and take care of the house. And now we both get what we want, and we get to move forward. And what's better than that, than working with someone who you love and they love you, and you both can get what you want out of this, and then I make sure that Lisa has time so she can go do a girls' night or whatever the heck she wants to do. And I just remember, hey, you got to go hunting. This is a win-win. I get to spend time with my kids and play some games, and Lisa gets to go do whatever the heck she wants, right? So as long as we're thinking win-win, that's just an invaluable practice that helps everybody.
I think those are really actionable, which I like about both the building and prioritizing vertical spirituality and the horizontal spirituality, is bringing it back to, again, I'll keep repeating this, the ownership and the autonomy that we have over all of these things. And so to recap some of those horizontal spirituality building practices to get that momentum rolling, we talked about striving to end conflict. So working, I feel like this can tie into that aggregation of marginal gains, right? When you hear strive to end conflict, that sounds pretty big, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh.
Like, are we striving to end world conflict? And it's, I think taking that marginal gains approach to this can be really impactful, because if everyone just tried to end 1% of the conflict in their life, there would be so much resolution of conflict.
And not only that, but think of the foundations we could have if in our most meaningful relationship in our life, we started to address some of those dragons, because they only get bigger.
Absolutely.
And right, that's the hard thing, is to have a meaningful relationship, we have to be vulnerable. Stable relationships are built on mutual vulnerability. Therefore, those who are closest to us also know how to hurt us the most. And sadly, that's the course a lot of us choose to take way too often, without apology, without conflict resolution, and we just think if we let it go, or we withdraw long enough, or we get the last word and that'll fix. And then what type of foundation is that to build the rest of our lives on? Or we could face these dragons. I mean, one of the scariest things I've ever done in my life is go to my wife and say, I want to address, we call it our every fight ever. Because regardless of whatever it's about, it all goes back to these main principles of I don't feel seen or heard, and I don't feel respected or seen or heard, or whatever it is, right? It boils down to this. And when I say, look, we've had these experiences that have brought up these, you've wanted to talk about it in the past, I haven't been ready, I'm ready to talk about it now if you are, and I want to work through this. Scariest thing I've ever done in my life, right? I've jumped out of planes, whatever, no big deal. But going to someone who I've been the most vulnerable with on all facets of life, but I've also committed my life to. So my choices is to continue to live with that misery, even though overall we've had a great marriage. But for a lot of years, we kind of had some of those major hurts just kind of down there. So we can continue to live with that, or we can face that dragon, we can overcome them, and now we have an even better relationship than we've ever had, and we have that fulfillment to continue to work on our other things. So we can choose to not be as stable, or we can face those dragons that only get bigger with time, and then we've conquered the dragon. Then there aren't skeletons in the closet. The stress that takes out of our life, the peace that brings, the serenity and the stability are incommunicable. I don't have the ability to communicate what that means to face some of those dragons with my spouse, and both of us together come out conqueror, holding each other, and we keep going.
Yeah, two big points that I think are really important in what you just said. Number one, you said when you're faced with those situations where there's something that you need to talk about, that you know you need to talk about, that you're maybe afraid to or dreading, or you know it's going to be challenging to talk about, there are two options. One of them is it continues to strain the relationship. Second option is you address it. There is no third option where someone comes in and fixes it for you. So again, it puts that autonomy back in our court, and that's really valuable. The second thing that stood out is I like that you specified one way to start here with striving to end conflict, because again, that can be a very big scope, is starting by striving to end conflict in the most really meaningful relationships in your life. Because I think there's a saying that's, probably an overused saying, but the hurt people hurt people. So the more unresolved conflicts, from my perspective, that you have in those meaningful relationships that just go unaddressed, the more you will lash out in the less meaningful relationships, right? You'll get angry at the coffee barista. You'll be angry at the grocery store checkout professional. You will snap or avoid building relationships with the people at work because your emotional, spiritual relationship battery will be drained. And so that I like as a very actionable place to start when you're prioritizing how to end conflict. And it starts maybe within your own home or within your own circle of those 2 to 3 really important people in your life. And just looking at those relationships and seeing if there's maybe some unresolved turmoil and some areas where you can do a little daily reflection and improve those lines of communication.
Yeah, and we'll dive a lot more into some specifics and options of ending conflict in your personal life in one of our call to action episodes. But there's just so much to say, because as I've worked on this and I've been with other people if they've worked on it, and I've just watched from afar for others, this is possibly the most life-giving spiritual momentum aspect that we can really do, because then we have a foundation to build everything else on. So I'll leave it there because I really want to dive into this more, but tune back in for another episode.
We'll have a whole episode on that because I do think there's a lot to go into that. So continuing on with how we can prioritize building horizontal spirituality. And the next two, I think, kind of go hand in hand, and that's serve those around you and practice gratitude. And so one of the really actionable ways that you said that this can be done is seeking out community service. And so if you don't quite know where to start, I think, in serving people around you, kind of just on your own creative whim, right, which is totally possible. Maybe you have a good grasp on that. But if you need a little bit more structure, you mentioned community service, organized community service being a good option, which I really like because that again ties back into that overlap between vertical and horizontal spirituality, where if you're practicing community service in a group, you're also getting that interaction with others who clearly value, unless it's mandated community service, who clearly value serving their community. And so those two things go hand in hand, and we'll link that justserve.org so that you can check that out and visit that if you're interested. The next one is so simple, but one of my favorites, and I think something that I really try hard to actively think about and practice. And you would think it would be so much easier because of how satisfying it is, but sometimes it's really hard. And that is to just be kind. And like you said, no kind act or no size of kindness goes wasted. And so if you can find a way to be kind every single day, in my opinion, there are a few things that are more impactful than that. So I don't think that one needs much more elaboration because I think we know what it means to be kind. And if you can find ways to sprinkle that in throughout the day, it's a win-win for both parties. The next one, hot topic, I think, especially, there's courses dedicated to it. Like you said, there's tons of podcasts. So this one, we can link some resources, but Google active listening and you'll find anything. But it really is a valuable skill to practice. And you use the quote, "tell me more," as a simple starting point. 3 words, you can write it on a piece of paper, stick it on your desk. And when someone comes in and wants to talk, and maybe you see that they need to express something, you might not feel qualified to give them advice on whatever they're talking about, but you're certainly qualified to say, "tell me more."
Yeah. And
they're the expert on their experience and they can tell you more.
As a chaplain, lots of times people come to me for advice, and that's just not a good way for me to give them advice. Most of the times, just by listening, they'll figure out their own answer, which is a million times better than me giving them advice. And that's the way it is with most things. If we will take the time to listen, which is a very difficult task, much easier said than done, then people can come up with their own answers, right? Or they can hear the stupidity that's flowing out of their mouth as they describe their actions. And more than once, I've had, whether myself or others, as we're explaining what happened, and then as we're saying it, we're like, whoa, I'm the problem here. Okay, well, then never mind. I don't need help fixing the issue. I now know the issue. But that active listening cannot be overstated.
It's huge. It goes back to what we talked about. People are seeking the easy button, and we're so used to just Googling and getting the answer. And I think active listening allows people to share, but it also allows people that time to critically think, to practice critical thinking, which we don't often get anymore. And so just sitting and being quiet, which is a skill that takes practice, can have a profound impact. If you do want to learn more about that or tools that you can use to practice that skill, it's also called motivational interviewing to some degree. Those topics are overlapped, which would be a whole nother 3-hour podcast if we tried to get into that. But definitely look into active listening, motivational interviewing, and that should arm you with some tools to start to practice this skill and to honestly have some fun just implementing it into your everyday conversations. Do it with some people that you're comfortable with to start, and then start to really bring it into your professional and personal world. And I can confidently say I would expect it to change the interactions that you have with people, and your understanding of people around you and their understanding of themselves. And it really serves to deepen that connection, which is what horizontal spirituality, in my understanding, is really strongly linked to. And then the last one that you mentioned that you can use to build momentum in horizontal spirituality is the think win-win. in our interactions with others, which came from the Stephen Covey Habits of Successful People or something along those lines.
Close
7
enough.
habits?
7 habits of highly successful people.
Okay. And so that win-win, I think active listening, motivational interviewing is a great place to start with that.
Mhm.
And then that bleeds into that when you're going into that interaction rather than just thinking of it as a one-sided interaction, right? Because that you can't really have a one-sided interaction. It's an interaction. So it takes 2 or more people. And so trying to find a way to make sure that both people get something out of it that resembles what they went into that conversation looking for is really important.
And the deeper we go with that, it's not even that we get something out of it. It's, Maddie, if we're going to do this podcast together, what is the best possible outcome that you can even imagine from this? And then I'll listen to you tell me about your best possible, and then I'll share you my vision of it, and then how can we work that so we both, as best we can both get it, right? Because the ultimate goal is, especially to the people close to you, you want them to interact with you again.
Yeah.
And this isn't manipulation because this is genuine, right? If you're trying to manipulate, then that's a whole nother set of issues. You can go to your local chaplain's office or mental health ward or whatever, right? But if you genuinely want what's best for someone else and they genuinely want what's best for you, this is the definition of the best possible outcome.
Yeah. And 2 minds working at a goal is much better than one, right? So you get 2 minds working on both goals rather than going in feeling like you have to kind of conceal your goal but still achieve it while competing with another goal. Instead, it's we'll work on both of these together and we'll try to accomplish both of them to the fullest extent that we can. And again, that goes right back to that horizontal spirituality of being connected with those around us.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, everyone. I think we're going to cut it there for this time, and we will come back. Thank you so much for joining us as we've dove more into how to prioritize spiritual fitness and what that looks like, and examples on the vertical and horizontal spirituality axes, and how to build the spiritual momentum. And thank you again for joining us, and come back next time.
Yeah, thank you, Chaplain Woodward, for providing so many actionable habits and practices that we can use every single day, 1% at a time, to really cultivate and prioritize spiritual fitness in our own lives.
Thanks. Have a great day.